It's designed to show the horrors of war. It's not quite as graphic as Saving Private Ryan, but it's in the same line as that kind of a movie, to say this is what war was really about, and these were young kids that were thrown into a completely inhumane situation.
The year is 1991. George Lucas created the Star Wars original trilogy, adopted a child, created the Indiana Jones trilogy, got divorced with split custody, and now he's on his way across the ocean to begin work on the Chronicles of Young Indiana Jones. The series consisted of multiple Indies at different stages of his life, bumbling into just about every major historical event, and was released with an accompanying documentary on the History Channel. The show was split up to different directors, different writers, filmed on location in different parts of the world, and all with that special Lucas flavor that you and I recognize from the prequel trilogy. That's enough background for now. The rest will come up as it becomes relevant. TLDR, this movie is a mess, and I really like it. The film, which I probably should have already mentioned is called The Trenches of Hell, starts in the French countryside. You may have already noticed that it looks old, much older than other films of the same year. That's because it turns out filming on location gets expensive, so Lucas opted for 16mm film as opposed to 35mm. While an obvious drop in quality, it also gives it a more classic vibe that I prefer. A long shot of the train pans, then cuts to Indiana Jones, 17 years old, played by the 33-year-old Sean Flannery, who up until this point only played a few minor roles in terrible Disney Mickey Mouse Club shows and a rom-com about a high schooler that gets his girlfriend's alcoholic mother pregnant. God, the 90s were weird. You may also recognize him as Connor from the Boondock Saints. Corporal Indy enlisted with the Belgian army at 17 and now leads the company after Flanders killed 3/4 of his men, leaving everyone a higher rank than our protagonist dead. Convenient for the plot and a recurring theme here. We are also introduced to 2 more characters, Remy, Indy's friend, and Jack, stereotype evil and suspected of murdering an officer. Just look at this guy.
Like carving butter.
He acts like this the whole time. It's so bad it's actually pretty funny. Indy's unit is placed under French command until Belgian officers arrive to lead the company. In the meantime, an 80s cool guy is promoted and given command. There's really not much depth to this character, but it's a Lucas film, so no surprise there. Cool guy, Lieutenant Morrow, walks in to see Indy trying to stop Jack from bullying people. They step off to the side to discuss command of the company. Indy is made third in command and invited to briefings. This is actually quite good. The film didn't have to do this. They could have just had the lieutenant take charge, give orders, and move on with the plot. But this scene shows he's willing to take advice, trusts that the man with experience in the company could help lead, and invites him to briefings so they all have the same information. This builds cohesion and trust. Can't ignore that hair though. Way out of regs. It would interfere with a good gas mask seal and encourage lice. It's probably a side effect of needing long hair for the later episodes. Indy briefs the men and attends the major's briefing. Their 70-man company will act as cannon fodder so that the French companies can flank. The acting is pretty good here. No dialogue, just facial expressions. An artillery barrage is started before the charge. Mr. Cool gives a speech, and the men go over the top. No Man's Land is the reason I like this movie so much. Up until this point, we got character introductions and clunky drama in a made-for-all audiences sort of tone. Now we see French bodies that couldn't be recovered and left for days or even weeks. Machine gun fire ripped through men, and artillery fire hit groups of soldiers. The tonal shift is so drastic, I love it. Right, back to the stupid. Men that get shot spaz and scream with no blood. It just looks silly. And of course, there's the plot. After getting pinned down, Indy and Mr. Cool have to get grenades to Jack, which he doesn't already have for some reason, so they blow up a dead tree to use as cover, and it just so happens to fall in the perfect spot. Very lucky that. Now they're close enough to get grenades to Jack. Jack gets his satchel full of party tricks, but decides it's worth jumping out of cover for one more grenade. Sure. The grenades take out the machine guns with an explosion comparable to an artillery barrage. The charge resumes, the Germans retreat, there's some hand-to-hand combat, and Indy's unit takes the trench. They dig in and learn the flanking French units didn't make it, so now only 25 combat-capable Belgians and a handful of French are holding the trench. The Germans' counterattack starts with gas, and the camera follows a desperate Belgian soldier that can't find his mask and succumbs to the poison gas. Questionable acting and a lack of effects aside, this scene is haunting. This is followed by artillery and flamethrowers. The fog of gas and music choice add to the horror tone the director was going for as the Belgians retreat. Ignore that the flamethrowers apparently only have 10-foot range in this movie, and nobody tries just shooting them, and you can really enjoy some neat shots. The survivors make it back to friendly lines and are given 2 days of R&R in a nameless French town. We get to enjoy a public shower scene, a laundry scene, and feet. World War I is synonymous with trench foot at this point. Moisture, cold, and inactivity are all contributing factors to reduce blood flow and increase porous skin that leads to nerve damage and gangrene. After cleaning, the nurse applies foot powder, which is 3/4 talcum powder with 1/4 cornstarch. It removes moisture. If symptoms were bad enough, the patient would be placed on bed rest, and a lead opium wash would be applied to numb the pain and encourage healing. Indy plays tennis against the British unit, while Round Rennie conducts high-stakes diplomacy with the locals. Indy loses the match and talks to a couple of British soldiers, Robert Graves and Siegfried Sassoon, two real historical figures and famous war poets. Robert Graves was the son of a successful poet, a decent boxer, and in his own words, proto-homosexual. Siegfried was another officer in his unit, and they bonded quickly due to their shared love of poetry and appreciation of the male body. Graves was so badly wounded during the Battle of the Somme that he was officially reported as dead. But he ended up surviving those injuries and living long enough to see a man land on the moon. Siegfried Sassoon was the son of a merchant and a sculptor, divorced. He was a cricket player and enlisted out of patriotism. After meeting Graves, his poetry took an abrupt shift from romantic to Graves' gritty realism style. Siegfried fell into depression and developed a manic courage. His men called him Mad Jack for his night raids and one event that nearly earned him a medal and a court-martial. During the Battle of the Somme, he used a bombing run and grenades to capture a German trench by himself just to read poetry instead of calling for reinforcements. He returned to his own trench without even making a report. The poet scene was very good, referencing events that happened to the war poets that would go right over people's heads, but if you knew the history, it develops a new meaning. Our cheery group returns to the front, where they're tasked with taking the exact same fortress that they failed to take earlier in the film. Looks cool, same silly problems. After taking the outer trench, they use the Lewis gun to provide covering fire while Indy and Co. cross a gap to reach a tunnel. In this tunnel is a bizarre scene. A single German soldier is keeping Indy and Co. pinned until Indy gets him with a knife. The German is abandoned by his buddies for some reason. He can't hit anyone despite their lack of cover for some reason. No one shoots back for some reason. It's just weird. The trio escape the tunnel, hip-firing their bolt actions like total ballers, and destroy the fortress with 3 artillery-grade grenades, ending machine gun fire and allowing the rest of the men to approach safely. The site is taken, but a group of Germans feign surrender and mow down Mr. Cool's friend. As Mr. Cool mourns, Indy takes the opportunity to recite poetry. The 13 survivors dig in and await reinforcements. Indy and Mr. Cool have a heart-to-heart, so he dies. The counterattack hits hard. Round Remy tries to run and is hit by a mortar. Mr. Evil saves Indy. They have a heart-to-heart, so he dies too. Germans swarm the trench and take the only 2 survivors as prisoners, Mr. Who Cares and Indy. This marks the halfway point in the movie, or the end of the first episode in the 2-episode arc. This is the end of the trench scenes, and therefore the end of my desire to discuss this film in detail, but I will give you some teasers and generalities, because I really do want more people to watch this thing. The pacing is all over the place. The R&R scene and a remake of a world-famous film take the same amount of time. Indy's French accent becomes an important plot point, even though the actor doesn't even use an accent. Anti-Russian stereotypes. Sean Pertwee makes an appearance as an angry German. Bombastic classical music and artsy horror shots. This movie isn't good, but there's a lot of good and a lot of funny in it.